Take a second look at the world around you right now. We take a lot of it for granted. The food in your cupboard, the petrol in your tank, the cash in your pocket. Things like these just appear when we need them, made possible by a chaotic web of thousands of different companies. We assume the economy is a messy, competitive jungle where no single player has too much control, but the reality is much more singular. There's a private dynasty in Australia that has quietly seized control of the country's entire circulation system. For 60 years, this family has aggressively acquired the infrastructure that keeps the nation alive. They own the warehouses that store your dinner, they own the tankers that fuel your car, and they even own the armored vans that move the physical currency through the banking system. You pass their agents every morning on the freeway, seeing that flash of red and yellow, assuming it's just another delivery service. That assumption shields a monopoly so deep that if this one company hits the brakes, the entire continent crashes through the windshield. This is the story of LinFox. The origin of this monopoly dates back to 1956, a year when Melbourne was vibrating with the electric energy of the Olympic Games. It was a time of aggressive modernization, and right in the center of that shift was a 19-year-old named LinFox. He'd recently been asked to leave Melbourne High School due to a, quote, lack of academic interest. But while his teachers saw a student who couldn't focus, the market was about to meet a business prodigy. Lindsay borrowed money to buy a single Ford F500 and entered an Australian trucking industry that was effectively the Wild West, filled with a chaotic, fragmented mess of owner-drivers living a brutal feast or famine existence where you only ate if a factory manager happened to call you that morning. LinFox looked at this and identified that the real enemy of profit was poor utilization. He understood that a parked truck was a liability bleeding money, while a moving truck was the only asset that mattered. He needed a way to keep the wheels turning at 365 days a year, regardless of the season. This birthed the famous summer and winter strategy. Fox spotted a perfect counter-cyclical pattern where soft drink manufacturers were desperate for trucks during the scorching Australian summer, only for that demand to evaporate the moment the temperature dropped in April. On the flip side, as Melbourne froze in the winter, the demand for heating oil surged, leaving fuel companies screaming for drivers in July despite having no work in January. Fox realized he could simply service both. He approached the soft drink companies and the fuel companies and effectively bridged the gap. He would haul soft drinks in the summer and convert the usage to haul fuel in the winter. It may sound incredibly obvious in hindsight, but at the time, it was revolutionary. He told these companies he could solve their headache exactly when they had it, and then he would disappear to help someone else when they didn't. This maximized the utility of his truck, meaning his capital asset was generating revenue every single day of the year, while his competitors' trucks were gathering rust in a yard. There's a fantastic quote from the Blank Canvas podcast where Lindsay reflects on this era. As the fleet began to grow, Fox realized he had another problem. He was still a small fish in a big pond, and he needed to project power and look bigger than he actually was. This led to one of the most brilliant pieces of guerrilla marketing in Australian corporate history. He decided to paint his trucks, and he bypassed the safe corporate blue or modest white options and chose a screaming, aggressive yellow and red. He wanted to ensure that you physically couldn't ignore a LinFox truck, but he went a step further by utilizing the psychology of the driver stuck in traffic. He knew that people could spend hours staring at the back of the truck in front of them, so he utilized that real estate. He printed the phrase, "You are passing another Fox," on the rear of the trailers. This gave the brand a personality, a polite, casual, and conversational one you could easily approach. But more importantly, it was a psychological trick. It told you that you were passing another Fox, planting a suggestion in your mind that there were thousands of them. It created an illusion of ubiquity and made the company feel inevitable. This branding strategy built a level of brand recognition that would usually cost millions of dollars in television ads, and Fox did it for the price of a tin of paint. This external bravado was matched by an internal ruthlessness regarding relationships. LinFox famously said, personal relationships are always the key to good business. You can buy networking, but you can't buy friendships. He spent the next decades cultivating genuine personal relationships with the titans of Australian industry and politics. He was close with union leaders like Bill Kelty, which allowed him to navigate industrial disputes that crippled other trucking firms. He was friends with prime ministers and CEOs. He understood that when a contract is on the line or when a crisis hits, people do business with the person they trust, not necessarily the person with the lowest spreadsheet quote. This handshake culture allowed LinFox to survive the brutal consolidation of the 1980s and 90s, where many of his original competitors were bought out or went bankrupt. Moving into the modern era, the strategy shifted from moving things to managing things. This is the concept of the supply chain lock-in, and it's the mechanism that generates the billions of dollars the family enjoys today. In the old days, a trucking company was a commodity. You hired them to move a pallet from point A to point B, and if someone else offered to do it for $5 cheaper, you fired the first guy and hired the second guy. Lindsay Fox knew that being a commodity is a race to the bottom. You're always fighting on price, and margins are always thin. So LinFox changed the game. They stopped selling transport and started selling supply chain solutions. Yeah, this might sound like corporate buzzword soup, but it's fascinating in how predatory it's designed. The goal was to integrate so deeply into a client's business that LinFox became impossible to remove. They would go to a company and propose to buy the client's existing fleet of trucks, take over the leases on their warehouses, and even hire their staff onto the LinFox payroll. They would run the entire logistics department for them, and this was a pretty attractive proposition for the client, taking a massive headache off their plate. They could get millions of dollars of their trucks off their balance sheet and focus on their core business. But for LinFox, once they took over the warehouse and the fleet, they became indispensable. If the client wanted to leave, they would have to rebuild their entire logistics capability from scratch. They would have to buy hundreds of new trucks, find new warehouses, and hire thousands of people. This was best showcased with BevChain. The alcohol industry in Australia is massive, but it's a logistical nightmare. Beer kegs are heavy and awkward, wine bottles are fragile, temperature fluctuations can ruin entire shipments. In 2006, LinFox saw an opportunity to corner this specific market. They approached Lion Nathan, one of the country's two biggest brewers, and proposed a joint venture. They created a new company called BevChain, specifically designed to handle the complex last-mile delivery for pubs, clubs, and bottle shops. The real power of the operation lay in the data. BevChain plugged its digital infrastructure directly into Lion's production lines, ensuring LinFox knew exactly what was being brewed and where it needed to go before the beer even went into the bottle. The joint venture proved so effective that LinFox bought out Lion's share in 2017 to take full control. They effectively incubated a monopoly within a partnership and then consumed it. The ultimate test of this lock-in strategy came during COVID, a period where the global supply chain disintegrated. For a logistics company, it was a nightmare, but for LinFox, it was an opportunity to prove that they were essential infrastructure. The Australian government faced a massive logistical challenge of distributing COVID vaccines. The Pfizer vaccines, in particular, had to be stored at ultra-low temperatures. It required a cold chain of unbroken refrigeration from the moment it landed in Australia to the moment it was injected into an arm. If the temperature deviated even slightly, the vaccine was ruined. You needed specialized freezer trucks, specialized monitoring equipment, and a level of security usually reserved for transporting gold bullion. So the government called LinFox. The company was awarded the contract to distribute the vaccine across New South Wales, Queensland, and the ACT. LinFox deployed their fleet of temperature-controlled vehicles, which were already best in class due to their work with supermarkets and food producers. While most of the country was in lockdown, LinFox drivers were crossing closed borders, navigating police checkpoints, and ensuring that the vaccines reached their endpoint. This period cemented LinFox's status. The company had eventually evolved into an essential arm of the government, demonstrating the resilience of the empire Lindsay Fox had built. On top of all the logistics, the company was also a master of leverage. This brings us to ArmorGuard, the division responsible for the armoured trucks that have been a fixture of Australian life for decades. For a long time, this was a simple, profitable business. You moved cash from the Reserve Bank to banks and ATMs, and you charged a fee. But by the 2020s, the industry was facing a mathematical death spiral. As Australians migrated to digital payments, the volume of physical currency circulating through the economy plummeted. Cash use in Australia fell from around 70% of all payments in 2007 to around 15% in 2022. However, the cost of moving that currency remained stubbornly high. Driving an armoured truck to a regional town requires the same fuel, the same heavy vehicle, and the same 2 armed guards regardless of whether they're transporting $1 million or a few thousand. This created a brutal war between the 2 biggest players, LinFox's Armour Guard and the Spanish-owned giant Prosegur. For years, these 2 companies fought a war of attrition. They were driving duplicate trucks down the same streets to service machines next door to each other, both losing money on every trip. In a normal free market, one of them would go bankrupt, but LinFox saw a different endgame, and he realized that if he could eliminate the competition, he would be the only cash transport company. Fox proposed a merger. He approached Prosegur and effectively said, if we keep fighting, we both die. If we merge, we own the market. He then presented this ultimatum to the ACCC, Australia's competition watchdog, and the argument was basically, allow these 2 giants to combine into a single monopoly or watch the entire cash distribution network of Australia collapse. The ACCC was placed in an impossible position. They recognized that approving the deal would grant LinFox a near total monopoly, controlling roughly 90% of the wholesale cash market. Yet, the alternative was a chaotic failure of the banking system's physical infrastructure. In 2023, the regulator blinked. They authorized the merger, and Prosegur's Australian operations were absorbed into the LinFox empire. But securing the monopoly was only the first step. By 2024, the newly merged entity was still struggling to turn a profit due to the rapid decline of cash usage. So, Armour Guard issued a threat to stop delivering cash unless the major banks and retailers agreed to pay significantly higher fees. The tension peaked when Anna Bligh, CEO of the Australian Banking Association, had to publicly announce a deal to keep the cash moving. The major banks and retailers agreed to a $50 million financial lifeline to sustain Armour Guard's operations.
Cash-in-transit business Armour Guard, which is owned by the LinFox-owned LinFox, will receive a $50 million lifeline from big banks and supermarkets. The deal was only signed late this afternoon, despite news reports this morning.
This moment perfectly crystallized the LinFox strategy. The major financial institutions were forced to subsidize a private company to keep their own systems functional. By integrating so deeply into the national infrastructure, LinFox had become too essential to fail, forcing the corporate sector to bail them out simply because there was no other option. We should also talk about Avalon Airport. For years, Avalon was a dormant airfield near Geelong. The Fox family are transforming the airfield into an industrial aerotropolis capable of handling high-speed freight on a global scale. The goal is to own the entire journey of a product from an Asian factory to an Australian shelf. In the Fox model, a cargo plane arrives from China, unloads directly into a LinFox-owned high-tech warehouse situated 10 meters from the runway, and the goods are cross-docked onto a LinFox truck within the hour. By owning the entry point into the country, they eliminate the friction of maritime ports and third-party handlers, effectively creating a private trade route that they control from end to end. Leading this transition is Peter Fox, the executive chairman. Despite recent speculation in the financial press regarding leadership changes, the structural integrity of the family wealth is absolute. Through the Fox Group, they've diversified their holdings to include industrial property, airports, and currency management. Even if the trucking industry were to collapse tomorrow, the Fox family would remain one of the most powerful landlords in Australia. When you zoom out and look at the map of Australia, you realize that LinFox has effectively privatized the country's circulation system. But that begs the question, is it dangerous? When one company controls the food supply chain, the fuel delivery network, the vaccine distribution, and the cash system, you've created a single point of failure. We saw a glimpse of that vulnerability with the armor guard crisis. The reliance on a private monopoly for essential services is a massive risk that the government seems willing to take because, frankly, LinFox gets the job done. They secured this position through aggressive capitalization in automation and electric fleets, outlasting their public competitors. LinFox scaled a simple focus on utilization into total market dominance. The resulting empire is inescapable. When that red and yellow truck appears in the rearview mirror, it serves as a reminder of the consolidation of power in Australia. The economy is no longer a competitive market, but a logistics network owned by a single family. But what do you think? Is it dangerous for one family to have this much control over the country's food, fuel, and cash? Or is it just the reward for running a better business than everyone else? Do you feel safer knowing that an Australian company owns the supply chain? Or does that level of monopoly make you nervous? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this deep dive interesting, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. Anyways guys, thank you so much for watching, and stay curious.